Good morning, and thank you for joining us. It's Saturday, and it's gone 9 o'clock, and this is Sunrise. I am Alero Edu.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Good morning and welcome. I just want to make an announcement right quick. Just had my cup of cocoa this morning, and I, did that thing that made someone jealous, and even upgraded the name of my cocoa drink to cappuccino. Yes, now I'm done. Yeah, is that what you said? Oh, in public. Yeah, the name in public.
He had cocoa, and he says it's cappuccino.
No, I didn't say. I don't even know what cappuccino means. Besides, cappuccino is
Coffee.
Yeah, I don't take coffee. It's too gizzing in my body.
It does
Don't
what?
even bother.
It does what?
Don't bother. Come on. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the budget proposal was sent to the National Assembly.
Okay, so you're talking about the budget of the federal government.
No, the budget of Ayo Makinde's house.
No. You said the budget. There are 36 states who also present budgets.
The president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria presented Nigeria's 2024 budget proposal to the National Assembly.
That's clearer.
I think it was on Wednesday.
Yeah, that's clearer.
Yes. Well, we shall be looking at that in detail because there are some things that some people are talking about. There are a number of things that people are talking about. And we should look at those in detail in the course of the program, like recurrent to capital, stuff like that. And how the budget is going to be funded, of course, all that is going to be part of the discussion this morning. But what has been among the things that have been trending is the talk about demolitions going on in several corners of Nigeria. Lagos State is one of them, Abia State is another, and it's looking like, I think we have even, touched on this some time ago, that what were the states looking at until estates were built on drainage channels and all that, and there's no compensation from what we hear.
What's to compensate?
I've built my house. It's cost me 100 million, and you just brought your bulldozer and pulled it all down. My life savings are gone.
It's a sword, right? In my opinion, it cuts both ways. In my opinion, yes. Federal or governments, federal, state, whatever, they have a major challenge as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Because if you were monitoring, you would have known before an estate of how many houses? 100 houses or thereabout? The first house came up, the second, it wasn't like Lego that you just arranged.
And by the end of the day, they're all up.
No. It
takes months.
Quite a number of months. So
yes. So what happened in all those months that the construction was going on?
So if enforcement was going on as it should, something would have been done about it.
At the foundation level.
That's for the one at the FCT, for instance.
Yeah.
And
some in Ikota, in the Lekki axis in Lagos.
In Lagos, quite that estate.
Yes.
The argument of government in those two areas is that of, look, you are on drainage channels. And I think Lagos State government, for instance, has decided that we are going back to the original plan. Now, one of the arguments put up by the Commissioner for the Environment in Lagos was some of those houses were rushed during the COVID lockdown because even agencies of government couldn't work because everyone was on lockdown and all of those things. But in my opinion, I would say it doesn't hold water. Heads should roll in those agencies.
Big time.
What were you guys looking at?
Till all the buildings...
Till all of these things
were completed, and the owners moved in.
And you still probably still collect, what's that thing?
Tenement rates.
Tenement rates, land use charge, and all those things from those people down through the years. So heads need to roll. If those houses were not properly permitted by government, heads need to roll. How come? Because those guys are still going to come out and say, this is why we could
Here
do
are
it.
my documents.
Exactly.
If those documents didn't go down when the buildings went down.
Exactly. Exactly. And of course, the government also said, the commissioner also said, look, anyone that got due certification should come forward with their proof. But that as far as at this moment, none of those houses,
had any documentation.
approved proper documentation and all those things. But for the ones in the FCT, it's something that's gone on for years as well, more than 10 years. What were successive governments looking at that kept all those things there until now? Heads need to roll in the agencies, if you ask me.
Yeah, but you know how Nigeria is. People do all these things, have the guts to do all these things because there are no consequences.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, things just have to change in this country at some point so that we are deterred by the fact that we know that if we went ahead and did those things, we'd have to pay for our misdemeanor. Another
angle to the whole conversation is that, some people are saying, it's witch hunting. It's because of the people in this, from this tribe, the people from that. Even in Abia State.
Are they the ones in Ikota?
Some are saying something like that. Even in Abia State, some were saying, the government, I saw on someone's WhatsApp status yesterday, most of the houses being demolished in Abia State, they belong to different tribes, and the people who are, of the Southeast extraction there, they are very, very few, maybe about 5%. And did you do the right thing in the first place? If we are saying that government
you need to answer.
If we are saying government has been acting with impunity, fine. But do we also, the people, have to act with impunity? I thought we always said this thing that he that must come to equity must come with clean hands.
Clean hands.
So if we are going to call government to account,
we ourselves must be in the...
that even in Kano, you remember in Kano State, as soon as the governor also came in, he also started the spit. I hope this thing doesn't go around in the country. Just looking for houses to pull down all over the place.
Okwebi Road.
No, there's no house pulled down in Okwebi.
No, not houses. Just about road construction going on, and what people in that axis have described, those who put messages through to me, have described as a lack of consideration for the people who use the roads, the particular road that is being constructed. Because we understand that Lagos Strait is trying to connect Okwebi Road to Ojota, which will make people's journeys shorter. But in the meantime, the people just have to suffer. Those going into Okwebi, I'm told, are able to go in through the Sheraton Link Road as
inward
they normally would, inward Okwebi. But those coming out have to go all the way through Toyin to go and make a U-turn under the bridge at Oba Akran. And that creates a whole load of bottlenecks.
While that may not even be much of a problem, if you ask me, what was the communication like? I think that's the major issue.
That's another issue entirely, isn't it?
But at least let's begin from there. Okay, for instance, the announcement was made on October 15 or 16 by the Lagos State government that the traffic diversion plan for the reconstruction of the Okwebi Link Bridge, would begin from Monday 16th for 4 weeks. 16th of October for 4 weeks.
4 weeks ended on the 16th of November.
I'm just saying. Okay. So then
and yet we're still at it. And there's no further communication as to, okay, work has been extended up to...
So they said motorists heading towards Mobolaji Bank Anthony from Allen Avenue, Toyin Street will make use of Toyin Street via Olayinde Street, which is the route that you're talking about. How many people are aware of this? For me, the issue has always been that of communication. If you use that road, when I applied Okwebi Link Road into Okwebi from Sheraton. I saw
No problem.
how easy it was. But I was looking for the drive back. I didn't find any. In fact, people literally parked on the roads on the other side.
Yeah.
Parked on
Showing
the road.
that no thoroughfare.
So communication, I think, is the major challenge here. We know you are working for us. The same thing, you know, we called out the federal government a lot of times when the work on the Lagos Expressway was going on. So, you know, we need to, for me, communication is the major thing here.
Yeah, work for us without putting us through so much pain. We will still see that you are working. Oh, gives me the impression that there's so little work going on that when they do eventually do something, we must all know that they're doing something because we suffer. Yes, now to the menu. Aptly, we're going to start by looking at the 2024 budget proposal, which was taken to the National Assembly in the course of the week.
Don't forget, it's a proposal. Now, you remember that the federal government promised that the Port Harcourt refinery will be delivered this month of December 2023. We'll talk about the feasibility of that and what are the other options we have. A number of other things on that.
And then, aptly again, we'll be looking at the state of Nigeria's aviation sector. Remember Nigeria Air? And remember that plane that was going to Abuja but somehow landed in Asaba? We'll be talking about all that.
Maybe there was a road diversion. I don't know.
Air diversion. Yeah?
Now, what is Tropical Christmas Wonderland Pride Land 2 about? That's also on the menu.
Lifestyle. Well, in the light of Christmas, Christmas is 3 weeks away.
Yes, and people are going to be feeding themselves all sorts.
Feeding themselves fat.
You mean feeding themselves obese?
We shall be looking at obesity this morning.
And the artist of the week, do we call her? Oh, I let that out.
Exactly. You said she's a she.
Oh, she's a she.
Yeah. She's a she.
Not a shim.
She is a she.
Okay.
So that's our lineup for this morning. So grab your cocoa or
Cocoa,
whichever you prefer, and just sit back and have some fun with us this morning. See you in just a moment. Wonderful song there, Nigeria will be great again. We are all very hopeful, very optimistic. But I know that sometimes you can begin to have second thoughts about that hope and that optimism disappears. But hope is what keeps us alive. We all believe that Nigeria has potential and Nigeria shall rise again.
You know, this kind of song, you know, we've heard over the years. I remember, you would of course remember, also Venom Mario's song.
Yes.
Nigeria Go Survive. I think it was in 1986, Ebenezer Obey did a song after Nigeria won the debut Golden Eaglets World Cup. He sang, Nigeria is still going to be sweet. Lagwaja also sang a song, I think about early 2000s or late 90s, Nigeria Go Sweet Again. So the optimism is there. And the confidence, the hope, the aspiration is there. How? I think that's the question.
Well, talking about the how, I suppose President Tinubu is telling us, and he has not stopped telling us, that this is the beginning of a new Nigeria, that this is the dawn of a new Nigeria, and everything he's doing, even though it may cause us some pain now, will bring us greatness in the future. So we should all look to the future. And one of these things is the budget, the budget proposal, I apologize, which he presented to a joint session of the National Assembly in Abuja on Wednesday. And this budget of renewed hope, as he dubbed it, is of 27 27.5 trillion naira. In this, his first budget since becoming president, he told the federal lawmakers that the revised 2024 to 2026 medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, and fiscal strategy paper, FSP, set out the parameters for this budget. He also promised that efforts would be made to contain financial leakages through the effective implementation of key public financial reforms. So let us get some experts this morning to help us examine this budget. Is this really a budget that is taking us somewhere? And if it is, where exactly do these analysts think it is going to take us? One of those analysts is with us here in the studio, and he is Mr. Wole Ogundare, business advisory consultant.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
And the other is the managing director of Cowrie Asset Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, who joins us virtually. Good morning, Mr. Chukwu.
Thank you for having me. Merry Christmas.
Oh, okay. Christmas has come early. Merry Christmas, Mr. Chukwu. Thank you for joining us. Let me start with Mr. Ogundare, who's right here in the studio with us. 27.5 trillion and all the other details that come along.
Correct.
My immediate question is this a realistic budget for Nigeria at this point in time?
Thank you. You see, whenever I hear budgets, I'm an accountant. Budgets are just numbers to us. I usually like to look at the assumptions behind the budget. That's where you get a bit more.
Dollar at 775.
Thereabout.
What are the other assumptions?
Okay,
oil production.
Oil production. 1.78 thereabout.
1.78.
Inflation 21.4. What else is there? You know, a few other assumptions. But you mentioned the medium-term expenditure framework. That is exactly what sits behind our budget. You know, so if you want to discuss the budget, talk about the medium-term expenditure framework, because it has set up what you call the resource allocation as well as the policy document behind the budget. It is also what makes the budget transparent. So let me talk about the medium-term expenditure framework. You'll understand how our budgets are created now, and if it is indeed a budget of hope. 5 things sit behind the medium-term expenditure framework. The first one is the macroeconomic framework itself, you know, which seems to look at all of the growth indicators. Then I think you mentioned that the president also mentioned the fiscal strategy paper. So everything fiscal, tax, infrastructure development sits there. The third one is the income and expenditure framework. So you mentioned that we have 27.5 trillion budget. You know, income is about 18 trillion. That sits there. Then the additional 2, those first 3 are very important. The additional 2 looks at our debt. One looks at the current debt statement, and the other looks at the existing debt statement as well as the current plus existing. So, you know, there's some debts now that we're going to take about 8-9 trillion, and there's an existing debt, circa about 88-90 trillion, which already exists. Now, those 5
The way
things,
you accountants call this figure, sometimes us mere mortals get really scared.
Well,
when you think about the number of zeros behind it, 1 trillion, and then you're saying 80 trillion.
Yeah. Which is why he said to them, budget is just a number. Hey, we have...
the budgets are numbers. They're numbers.
I'm having a fit.
Which is why I said, let's look at the assumptions behind it. When you look at these assumptions, the first thing I typically look at is the growth rate. So the macroeconomic framework tends to force you to look at the growth rate. What growth rate have they sort of put in the MTEF that the president projected? 3.76. Now, if you look at that growth rate, how does it really make sense? You compare it to the population growth rate in Nigeria. Our population growth rate today is about 2.5. So if you look at a 2.5 population growth rate relative to a 3.76 growth GDP, it tells you immediately that this is not a budget of hope. It is a budget of coasting along. Let us just coast along for now. Any budget of hope will be something where the growth rate is around 7 to 10%. So I guess the guys in charge, they're being very careful, you know, not to overestimate their positions, you know, which is why they've said, look, let us just coast along. So anything around hope, forget it. Nigerians should just forget it for now. There's nothing hopeful around it.
Oh dear.
This is not the budget, for me, that will, you know, reduce the Japa syndrome. It is not the budget that will also create some huge industrialization or some human capital, massive development, or a budget that will encourage employment and all of those things. No. Okay. This is just, let's just coast along for now.
Okay.
And all of the indicators seem to speak to this.
Let me ask, before I, you know, follow up with Dr. Chukwu on this particular issue. Let me ask you first of all, and this is something that bothered me for a while. Every government comes on, you still answer, you know, Alero's question about what your thoughts are on this budget. But before we go there, I want to ask you this. Every budget cycle, one of the questions that comes to my mind, maybe it's a little too simplistic. How can I give you more money when you haven't duly, adequately, and persuasively justified how you collected, how you dispensed the first one? So do you see that as an issue, that we don't have a good enough understanding of how the previous budget was spent, or we now have to, as Mr. Gundari said, coast along with another budget?
Is that question for me?
Yes, it is.
Okay. We have to recognize that the Minister of Budget and National Planning actually came out with a breakdown of the performance of 2023 budget up to September ended. If you look at that budget performance so far, it was reported by the minister that the total government revenue for the first 9 months of the year was 8.6 trillion. Of course, government spent about 11.4 trillion in the first 9 months of the year. And remember that government had projected to spend about 24 trillion naira for the entire year. But at the end of the first 9 months, they had only spent barely less than half of what we had projected, principally because the revenues were not realized. So two things you have to look at when you talk of implementation of previous year's budget is that why was the budget not fully implemented? Because the revenue estimation of the government was overly optimistic. So if you fail to achieve your earnings, then it becomes impossible for you to achieve your expenditure. And what we have dealt with, which is why it looks like we don't get the impact of the budgetary implementation or execution, is that government had focused on what we call non-discretionary expenses. Those are expenses related to payment of salaries and wages, meeting the overhead of the government, the living style and living standard of those in public service have been the priorities of government, while as the rest of the money goes to fund debt service. And if you even look at this year's budget, because we, unfortunately, I'm happy with what my colleague there said, we are basically replicating what we've had in the previous years. This year's budget, the government had made provision of total expenditure of 27.5 trillion, and on assumption that it will generate 18.2 trillion. But last year, based on what the Minister of Budget said, the first 9 months of the year, we only generated 8.6 trillion. If you take that 8.6 trillion that generated in 9 months, the run rate simply on average, we are generating about 950 billion every month. Yes, what that means that at the end of this year, we will at best generate 11.5 trillion. So if you have known that you can at best generate 11.5 trillion this year, why are you budgeting to generate 18.2 trillion? So obviously, you have made an estimate that is not realistic. So if you make an estimate that is not realistic, knowing fully well that you are going to spend 8.25 trillion naira to pay debt, you spend another 9.92 trillion naira on your overhead, salaries and wages and running expenses and traveling around the world. So you are going to spend without spending 1 kobo on infrastructure, you're going to spend about 18.17 trillion naira on recurrent expenditure and debt service. And you have budgeted, you will generate 18.2 trillion. So if you fail to do that, you have to start borrowing to meet those compulsory payments. That leaves no room for capital expenditure. In fact, if you look at this year, capital expenditure, next year budget, capital expenditure provision is 8.7 trillion naira. The government intends to borrow. The budget is about 9.18 trillion naira. So every kobo that will be spent on infrastructure will be borrowed. So if government is unable to borrow, then it will not spend on infrastructure. And that's why we're not getting the impact. That's why we're running a cycle over the past few years, because you're not seeing the impact of budgetary allocation and budgetary expenditure on the life of Nigerians. The critical investments are not being made.
But do you see those figures coming down, those recurrent expenditure figures? Do you see them coming down in any way, manner, shape, or form? Because already from what you're saying now, it's like, I'm very poor with maths, but it sounds like a little more than 50% of the budget that is going into this recurrent expenditure.
Correct.
Yes, 9.92 billion on 18.2 trillion is more than 50% of total revenue. And if you look at the expenditure, it's in the region of 45% of the total expenditure. But the key thing is that we should not expect the recurrent expenditure to go down. We should actually expect it to go further up. When the government is planning in the budget that was recently passed, the supplementary budget, government is going to spend on additional vehicles. Government is going to spend on presidential fleet. What that means, these are items of consumption that has an operating cost element built into it. If you buy 5 vehicles, additional 5 vehicles, you're going to buy fuel for those vehicles, you're going to maintain those vehicles, you're going to pay for drivers for those vehicles.
Yes.
And so what we're doing here, we're further building the base on which recurrent expenditure is spent on. Because when you keep building on this, you are going to add more. We have not seen any strategic initiative that will bring down recurrent expenditure, just that rationalization of the public service. That has been mounted for the past 24 years. It's not been implemented. Rather, we are seeing creation of additional ministries, agencies, and departments as ways of creating jobs for the boys. So we should expect, which is what we have seen in the past 8 years or 10 years. We've seen consistent increase in the recurrent expenditure of government because the structure on which you incur recurrent expenditure is being expanded.
Well, Mr. Ogunari, one of the issues, or defense, so to speak, for want of a better word, put up by government at some point when that argument came that creating more ministries or departments or agencies of government is expanding the expenditure net, so to speak, further. But the justification, well, maybe an argument, not justification, an argument that was put forward was, look, it's better to have a more detailed system that is more productive than have few that are not productive. What do you think that's a fair argument?
No, it's not, because what I would do is I would challenge the productivity of those MDAs. What is their productivity? Again, let's look at the budget. Your productivity must speak to that budget. Our budget today, total productivity, is around 33 to 35 billion US dollars. We have a population of 200 million, 210 million people. South Africa's population, I like comparative analysis a lot. South Africa's population is about 59, 60 million people. The budget is 4 times ours. The budget is about 192, 93 billion US dollars. Now, if you want to talk about productivity, I would imagine that what you're trying to do is expand that 33 to 35 billion US dollars, expand it further with the creation of new ministries, which is what my colleague, the doctor, just said that, look, how is it going to happen? If, for instance, we're saying those ministries, for instance, they're going to give us an additional 50 billion US dollars in addition to what we currently have. Hoorah! Who's going to say no? We're all going to, I'm going to be here smiling and jumping and, saying, this is the budget.
Leading me to this question, Mr. Ogunari. The blue economy, I've seen figures about how the potential of that industry in hundreds of, is it millions or billions of dollars?
Billions of dollars.
And in Nigeria, the potential no less.
Correct.
The solid minerals sector, Mr. Lake put the viability at something in the region, is it 700 million or $700 billion as well? The agricultural, the livestock sector of Nigeria's agricultural industry, as I'd say 3-4 years ago or more, was put at something in the region of $31 trillion. That's from the office, no, it's trillion naira. That's from the office of the Vice President and or the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Now, these haven't significantly opened up.
Correct.
What would you say are the challenges? Let's talk about, I mean, we can say okay, the solid minerals, sorry, the blue economy is new. But the solid minerals has always been there.
Great.
The agricultural sector has always been there.
Yeah.
In fact, that was the cash cow, so to speak, in the First Republic. So what's our challenge with those?
Now, let me tell you what the challenge is. There's an infrastructure master plan. There's a national infrastructure master plan. It was updated in 2022. If you look at that document and compare Nigeria's infrastructure stock, which means our total infrastructure, which is how we're going to convert these possibilities into money. Our current infrastructure stock as a function of GDP today is around 30%. It is extremely low. I've said this in so many places. As long as your total infrastructure stock to your GDP is low, there is no way you can generate money. It can't happen. All of the countries that are very productive have very high infrastructure stock. China is even too far, but China is in the 90s in terms of percentage.
And that's talking about capital expenditure.
That's talking about capital expenditure. So you have to find a way to improve your infrastructure stock to GDP ratio, you know, in a modular manner, which is again what my colleague mentioned to say, look, over the years, the implementation of our capital expenditure within the budget has been somewhere around 40%, extremely poor. Therefore, how are you able to translate the possibilities? Let me give you an example. I have a client, you know, in the plastic manufacturing sector, who says today, his cost of sales, 60% of it is power, as an example. And he was saying that, look, if he had a way to reduce that to about 30%, he will hire more, he will produce more, he will pay more taxes, etc., etc. You see where I'm going with this? Therefore, as long as that infrastructure stock remains poor, and Nigerians must understand this, it's the aggregate value of our total infrastructure, road, rail, power, health infrastructure, security infrastructure, agric infrastructure, transport infrastructure, all of those things put together is currently poor. And you see, I always like to look at Nigeria as 6 countries in one. I always don't like, because each region has grown in a sort of different pace. Therefore, as a government, and coming back to MTEF, which helps you look at your fiscal strategy paper, that fiscal strategy paper is not just tax. I hear a lot of tax, expand tax, etc. There's infrastructure in there. Somebody should be saying, according to all the 6 geozones, this is how we want to grow each geozone based on the, you know, sort of innate requirements.
Maybe they themselves should come up with some kind of proposal. Because, I mean, shouldn't they also... Anyway, that's not for today.
Okay. Dr. Chukwu, from the calculations which Mr. Ogundare made, or from the facts that we have from the budget proposal, the budget deficit comes to about 9 trillion. We don't even know how we are going to fund the budget itself. I mean, and then there is a 9 trillion naira deficit. Please explain to us the meaning of that in layman's terms so that we can understand clearly. We haven't even found money to do the main job. We have added things that amount to 9 trillion, which we have to also find money to take care of.
Okay, thank you, Alero. Let me use myself as an example to bring it closer home to people. It then means that, for instance, I'm saying that my total annual income, my total salaries amounts to something like 200,000, and that I have a plan to spend something in the region of 300,000. I'm going to spend 300,000. So I'm already owing debt. I'm already owing debt worth about 1 million. So I need to pay interest on that debt. So I need to go borrow another 100,000. So the question becomes, where do I get this 100,000? Who will lend to me? What the government has done is that they have made a provision of total expenditure of 27.5 trillion and 18.2 trillion as income. And therefore, that leaves a gap of about 9.18 trillion naira. They have said to us that they will borrow about 7.8 trillion from multiple sources, local market, foreign international bond market. And then they will also receive about 263 or 283 billion naira from privatization. That we have had in the budget for years, and I don't know what they will privatize the next 12 months that they get 280 or 260 billion. So that's also something in the air. And then they say they have about 1 trillion naira lending, multilateral lending, the likes of African Development Bank, World Bank, the monies that they are committed to lend to Nigeria, that they withdraw on it. That means they will borrow about 1 trillion from that source of people who are supporting some specific developmental initiative. Take, for instance, the malaria eradication initiative, tuberculosis eradication initiative. Some of these initiatives that you have World Bank supporting, that they will draw that 1 trillion. Okay. Even that 1 trillion, we start to pay back in future because it's not grant. If it's grant, it's a gift. But as long as it's loan, even if it comes at a minimal interest rate, it will be paid back at some point. It could be 20, it could be 30 years, but it builds into our debt profile. So we are back to a situation where we are going to borrow and borrow and borrow, and most importantly, we are projected to borrow 9.18 trillion, because when you ignore when you compartmentalize them and say this is 7.8, the other one is 1, you forget that they are still borrowing about 9.18 trillion. When you borrow that, you are going to add up to your current debt profile. You are going to pay interest on that. So your interest service will be higher than what it is now. And that's where we are. So we are digging a hole. And like they said, look, one of the commonsensical statements is people say that when you're in a hole, stop digging. But we're in a hole, we're digging further, and we're hoping that one miracle will happen. And then we'll come up and start flying in the air. We're getting deeper into the ditch. And we just need to find, and I have advocated repeatedly, including in your station, that we have to involve a funding mechanism where the government can fund capital projects, not from budgetary allocation, because we're not going to have a revenue profile in the next 10 years to build infrastructure that will make us commercially competitive. I mean, my colleague in the studio has said clearly that if you compare our capital goods stock to any other country in the world that is developing, we're not anywhere close to it. So we need to do. So we're not going to the allocation.
Dr. Chukwu, but we are already owing so much. I think about 81 trillion or something that we owe already.
Yes, and that's why I said we're in a hole and we're digging further. The government had just applied for National Assembly to approve about $7.8 billion of borrowing and 100 million euro. I'm sure you remember that. And that's still in the works. I don't know whether they have approved that. They said the previous government had consented to that. And I wouldn't know. If the federal government has adopted that is wrong, why do you want to continue on it? But beyond that, about that, we want to borrow now 9.18 trillion. So all this is we must stop our debt, and then we're going to get to a point where it will be difficult for us to service it. Before you, then let me just mention this. If you look at this year's budget, you have provision of debt service of 8.25 trillion. I had mentioned earlier that at the end of the first 9 months of this year, we've only earned 8.6 trillion. You want to service debt next year by 8.25 trillion. So your debt service to actual revenue will be in the region of 90% at the end of this year.
Okay, we are totally out of time, but gentlemen, you have to address this one in 30 seconds both ways. Let me start with you, Dr. Chukwu. One of the arguments that the federal government has put forward is that this draft budget has been prepared against the backdrop of continuing global and domestic changes. How challenging is that for you in the light of our realities?
Well, I think beyond the global changes, most important, you have to look at what are my own internal potentials. You can't build a budget based on what is happening globally. You have to look at what are my own potentials. The core of a budget is based on assumption of what are your potential, what are your capabilities. If you look at the global global environment, the oil sector, OPEC just reduced crude production, and there's already some dissenting voices on reduction of crude production. You could see next year that OPEC will not be able to put together the OPEC Plus alliance. So that means crude price could actually drop below the $77.96 dollars they have projected, and that could throw entire projections of revenue into this area.
Okay. Well, Mr. Gundari.
Yeah, for me, two things. One, if you look at the oil sector, which is where I think we can generate a lot of funds internally, I'll also look inwards. Two things: vandalism, theft. Find a way to eradicate it. Those two things, do it first. And then the next thing, we'll be looking at the body language that we're exhibiting. You can't be buying 160 million Jeeps. It sends the wrong body language altogether to the global community. Those will be the two things. So I will look inwards and say, look, how do we reduce all of the spending? And then, you know, a lot of people have talked about your on-site report as well that wants to streamline internal expenditure. How can we implement some of that report, if not all?
Forget sending a wrong message to the international community. You're sending a wrong message even to your own people, whom you are asking to tighten their belts all the time.
Correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wole Ogundare, Business Advisory Consultant, who joined us in our studio in Lagos, and Dr. Johnson Chukwu, MD, Cowrie Asset Management Limited, who joined us virtually. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Sunrise will be right back in a moment to look at another interesting conversation. Please join us.